Hi, I'm Phil at the Soundproofing store, and today we are on site at the home of one of our customers who today is installing our ReductoClip Ceiling System. And they very kindly allowed us to pop down and film the installation so we can show you guys what it is, what it's made up of, how it works, and exactly step by step how it's all installed. So perfect opportunity to show you guys what it's all about. Now, just to explain, this case is a little bit different to a lot of other ceiling installations for the reason of 9 times out of 10, if someone is soundproofing a ceiling, it's probably because they're in a home or a flat or an apartment where there's a room or another dwelling directly above. And it's the sound from the space above traveling down into the space below that they're trying to soundproof from. Now, in this case, it's actually an extension that was built quite a long time ago, and there's a flat roof. And the problem is when it rains, the impact and force of the rain hits the top of the roof very hard and creates a lot of impact vibration. And that vibration travels through the roof, through the joists and down into the ceiling below, and can be really, really noisy. So what we're actually here today to do is to try and stop the sound of that rainfall. However, if that's not the situation you're in, it doesn't matter. The science is exactly the same. Whether it's footsteps, whether it's dragging furniture, or whether it's rainfall, it's all vibration being created on the surface above, getting into the structure and spreading down. So decoupling the system and installing a high mass soundproof ceiling is the right solution. And the other benefit with this system is it's also going to reduce a high level of airborne sound. So again, for most people, it will be reducing things like voices or television noise from the flat above or room above. In this case, it's going to be more for things like traffic noise from the road outside and things like that. So let's get inside and we'll show you guys how it's all done. Now we're inside the room, and what we're going to do is a little sound test. Now, because this is a roof above and not an internal floor, it's very difficult to perform a building regulation style standardized sound test. So what we're going to do instead is just our own kind of DIY sound test, just to show you guys the difference before and after. So I'm using a handheld meter, and what we're going to do is measure the average volume in the room when we're being absolutely silent. And that gives us our background volume. And that's what we're trying to aim to get closest to when there is a noise outside. And then we're going to test again with one of my colleagues outside tapping on the roof, recreating that impact noise. So I'm going to be really quiet now and measure the sound when it's silent. Okay, so we're averaging around 40 to 42 decibels as a background noise. So now we're going to recreate some impact noise on the roof above, and we're going to measure again. And we're averaging around 55 decibels. So we want to get down from 55 to as close as we can to 40. So that's 15 decibels to try and get back to silence, basically. So I'm going to talk through the first steps. Now, the first thing is just to check the ceiling for anything that's fixed onto the surface and remove them. So there was a lighting fixture that's come down. If you have anything like smoke detectors or anything like that that's fixed onto the surface of the plasterboard ceiling, that needs to come down. Second step in this case is we've got some coving up in the corners. That's going to come down as well. Now, if you want to keep that coving and put it back on again, as long as you're very careful, in a lot of cases you can take it down without damaging it and put it back on again at the end. In this case, the coving is not going to stay. It's not going to go back up, so we don't need to be as careful with pulling it down. And then the next stage is to start bringing down the ceiling itself. Now, this is just a plasterboard ceiling, so it's quite easy to take down. If you have got a lath and plaster ceiling, it is a little bit trickier, but again, it ideally does need to be removed. Now, a lot of customers do ask us, can we keep the existing ceiling and retain that and build the soundproofing ceiling below it? Well, yes, you can if you need to, and it will still give you some improvement, but not as much of an improvement. And that's for two reasons. First of all, taking the ceiling away gives us access to the joists, because what we do want to do is insulate the joists with acoustic insulation. The second part is, if we have mass of the ceiling or the floor above, mass of the existing ceiling, and mass of the new ceiling, it actually complicates things in terms of how the sound waves travel through that structure and how those two air cavities react. And that again can give you a negative result. Now, it's not going to make things worse, but it's not going to make things as good as it could be. So you'll always get the best results by just having mass on the top and mass at the bottom in those two layers without any third layer in between. Okay, so take down the existing ceiling, insulate the joist, and put the new ceiling straight onto the existing joist. And that's going to get you the best results. One other thing to note is you will see, as we're filming the installation, the guys who are installing the system today. Now, that is actually the owner of the property. They're not professional soundproofing installers. They've never installed soundproofing or this system before. But the owner of the property is an electrician by trade, so he's got a good level of DIY skills. And we always say that a good, competent DIYer is really all you need. You don't need to have installed soundproofing before. As long as you follow the instructions properly, it really is quite straightforward. So you're going to see the owner of the property installing it himself with a little bit of guidance from me as I'm here. Okay, so the ceiling is down all together for taking off the coving and the plasterboard ceiling and the insulation that was in there. It took about 45 minutes. So it didn't take too long at all. What we're going to do next is insulate. Now, usually if this is a situation where there's another dwelling, another flat or another room above, and so it's floorboards above the joist, what we do is install about 100 millimeters of acoustic mineral wool. Now, the reason why we do that is because if the joist cavity isn't insulated and you have a void space between the floor and the ceiling below, when sound gets into that void, the sound bounces around in there and resonates, echoes, and amplifies, becoming louder. It's what we call the drum effect, because it's basically how a drum or an acoustic guitar works. Now, acoustic mineral wool will absorb that sound, stop it from bouncing around and resonating, and will help keep the volumes down. Now, in this case, we're going to do it a little bit differently because it's not a floor above, it's actually a roof and it's exposed to the elements. One concern is about improving the thermal performance of the room as well. So what we're going to do is use 50 millimeters of a PIR thermal insulation above and 50 millimeters of an acoustic mineral wool below. And that's going to solve both problems of sound and thermal. Now, for the keen-eyed viewers who saw that there was insulation already up there that we've taken out, that was fiberglass insulation that's been up there since the building was built about 40 years ago. So it's not in the best of conditions. So we thought best to take that out and re-insulate to get the best performance. So now it's time for the acoustic insulation. Now, we recommend to use a 60 kilogram per meter cube acoustic mineral wool. Now, there's several different brands that have a insulation at that spec, but today we're using Rockwool, which is very good. A couple of things when you're installing Rockwool. First of all, you want to cut your slabs or install your slabs so they are slightly wider than the space that you're installing in. And the reason you do that is it makes it a lot easier to just friction fit. It means you don't have to put in any cables or mesh or anything to hold the slabs in place. Because they're very dense and they hold their shape, they're not going to move or fall about anywhere. So in this instance, the space between the joists on average are around 350 to 360 mil. If we cut the slabs at 400 mil, so a little bit wider, we can just compress them in at the side, push them into place and let go, and they will just hold themselves there. Because we know that all of the slabs are all getting cut to pretty much the same size, rather than cutting each individual slab one by one, which takes a lot of time, a good top tip is to actually cut the slabs while they're still in the packaging and cut the entire bale in one go. So we can cut all 8 slabs just in one cut. The last thing is, a lot of people ask us what to use to cut mineral wool. Actually, mineral wool is very easy to cut. Something just like a bread knife cuts through Rockwool very easily. Today, because we're cutting through a whole bale and we want something long, we're just going to use just a normal saw. Okay, so the ceiling is fully insulated, which means we can move on to the next step, which is to install our ReductoClips. Now this is the magic part. This is what does all the work. Now, to explain a little bit about the ReductoClip and how it works and why it works. When we're soundproofing, there's two main things that we need to do. And that is that we need to increase the mass and the weight of the surface, because it's that mass that blocks the airborne sound. So we're going to line the ceiling with very, very heavy, very dense layers. But the trickier part is that sound is an energy. It's a vibration. Vibration travels very easily through solid material. So this is why if the floorboards and the ceiling boards are all screwed straight to the joists, the vibration from the top will just spread through the floor, through the joist, through the ceiling, and so on. So to stop that energy and vibration from traveling through, we need to dampen it and absorb it. So to do that, we need what we call decoupling, so separation. And that's where the ReductoClips come in. Now these basically act like shock absorbers. So if you think about how the suspension springs in your car work, that by the car being more flexible and floating on those springs, it absorbs the vibration and the impact of things like driving over a pothole. Whereas if your car was completely rigid and stiff, you'd feel this really hard, awful impact. So that's what the ReductoClips are bringing. So all we do is we screw them straight onto the bottom of the joists at certain spacings, which we'll talk through. And then into the ReductoClips, we attach these long metal bars called fairing channels, which will go across the ceiling. And they allow us to then fix the plasterboard layers, or the mass, onto this system. And it creates a decoupling suspension system. So the mass layers aren't rigidly attached to the joist. They're suspended and almost floating. And now when you create an impact above, and that vibration spreads through the floor and through the joists, it gets to the clips, and they dampen and absorb that vibration, stop it from getting through to the ceiling side. So that's how it works. So in terms of actually installing the clip, it's very simple. We're going into timber joists. So we just need timber screws. And there's two fixing points on the clip. So you just want to fix your timber screw through each hole on either end, straight into the timber joist. But they're going to be installed at very specific spacings. Now, going along the joists, we want them to be, the center of the clip should be up to 400 mil apart. Okay, they can be closer, but you don't want them any further apart than 400 mil. So we're going to do them in rows, going across the joist, 400 mil apart. Obviously with one clip right at one end and one clip right at the other, so you're supporting the weight of the plasterboards around the perimeter. But then going across the joists, they can be installed up to 1200 mil. Okay, so if your joists are 600 mil centers, you'll go every other joist. If they're 400 mil centers, you can probably do every 3, maybe even every 4 in this case. Now, one thing just to mention, a lot of people, when they start to install the system, they have a bit of a panic when they feel the weight of the other layers that they start to install. Acoustic plasterboards are very, very heavy. Another material called Tecsound, which we're going to go into, is very heavy. And people panic about whether the clips can support that amount of weight. So now I can tell you very confidently, these are tested to carry a huge amount of weight, all the weight that we're going to add and more at these spacings, okay? So that's not something that you need to worry about. If you install them at these correct spacings, that it's going to hold that amount of weight. You don't need to install them closer than the spacings that we have in the installation guide, okay? So we're going to start fixing them up, and you can see how easy that is to do. So one quick thing to mention about when you're fixing the ReductoClips, and this is the same whether you're putting it on a wall or on a ceiling, is that when you're screwing them in, you want to screw it to the point where the head of the screw just nips onto the washer, just to hold it in place. You don't want to over tighten so that the foam on the back squashes and compresses, because that's going to make the whole system go very rigid. And the idea is we want it to act like a shock absorber. We want it to have some flex and some movement. So you just want to get it to the point where it just touches the washer. It's going to hold the clip in place, but without over tightening. Now this is the ReductoClip fairing channel. And this is basically the part of the system that you're going to screw your plasterboards to, okay? Now, it's very simple to install, Basically on the ReductoClip, you've got brackets on either side, and the fairing channel literally just clips in. So you slot one side in, squeeze the fairing channel so it slightly bends, and it just clicks into place. No screwing or anything needed. Now, a couple of benefits of this channel is that we've specifically made it so that it's much wider. The actual part of the channel that you've got to fix your plasterboard to, this is actually 50 millimeters wide, whereas all the other systems on the market are more like 30 mil. And that makes it a lot easier because you've got more space to actually screw your plasterboards. In particular, where with a ceiling, you've got two plasterboards that are going to meet in the middle of a channel. Now, first of all, you've got a center marking, which makes it a lot easier to see where your center is, but it means you've got 25 mil either side to fix into with the ends of your plasterboards. Whereas with a 30 mil bar, you've only got 15 millimeters on the very edge of the plasterboard to fix into. So it makes it a lot easier. Another benefit is that it's very, very easy to cut. Now you'll see today they're being cut with an angle grinder because it's very quick, very simple, and we've got the tool here. But actually you can cut it with just a pair of tin snips. You literally just snip either end and bend the bar and it snaps. So it's very simple with very basic DIY tools. And finally, the clip and the bar together is only 25 millimeters thick, which makes it the slimmest isolation clip system on the market, which again with the ceiling in particular is really helpful because even once we add our plasterboard layers and the Tecsound layers, the ceiling is only going to drop by 60 millimeters from the bottom of your joist. So for a high performing soundproofing system, it's very, very slim. So just to explain one element, the fairing channels come in 2.4 meter lengths. Now, of course, if your ceiling span is less than 2.4, you can use a whole bar and cut it down to size. But of course, many ceilings will be longer than 2.4 meters. So how do you extend? Well, all you need to do is cut a piece of bar that will extend from the other side to overlap by 150 millimeters. What we don't want is to have the bars just butting up at the ends, because when you put weight on, they're gonna come down. So you want to overlap by 150 millimeters. They connect in together like that. You want the overlap to be in between clips, not over a clip, because then it won't fit into the brackets. So you want the overlap to be somewhere in the space in between two of the clips. And we're going to use self-drilling screws, 2 on either side, to connect them together and make that nice and solid. Okay, so the ReductoClips and the fairing channels are now up. The overlaps have been connected and secured, so we're ready for our mass. Now the idea is to add layers onto the ceiling. They're very, very heavy, very, very dense. The more mass we can get on there, the more airborne sound it's going to block. So the first layer we're going to attach is a 15 millimeter thick acoustic grade plasterboard. Now the difference between acoustic plasterboard and standard plasterboard is it's just heavier. The mixture inside is a denser mixture. So for the same thickness, it's much heavier. These sheets today are just under 13 kilograms per meter square. So the full sheet is about 40 kilograms. So be very careful. They are very heavy. You don't want to try and lift them on your own. You need 2 people to safely lift and carry the sheets. One thing we are doing today to help with raising the plasterboard up to the ceiling to fix, although there's a few different techniques you can use, the safest and easiest is to use a plasterboard lift. Now these are relatively cheap to hire. You can buy them. We hired this from a local tool hire company in Ripon called SHC, and we're going to put the plasterboard onto the lift, make it flat, and then just winch it up to the ceiling so the weight is being held, it's held in position, and we can just get up and screw it then into the fairing channels. To screw it into the fairing channels, we are using 25 mil length self-drilling screws. Now a top tip before you start fixing your first layer of plasterboard, because we're going to be fixing multiple layers of board, and to fix them we need to know the locations of the fairing channels that we're fixing into. But of course, once we put the first layer up, we're no longer going to be able to see the fairing channels. So a really good tip is just to go around the perimeter and you with a pencil or a piece of chalk or something, just mark onto the wall the location of the center of your fairing channel. And do that on both sides, so once the first layer is up and you can't see them, you can easily locate roughly where you need to screw into. So first plasterboard's up, and just to give you a couple of tips, two things we want to look out for is just making sure that we're leaving a 5mm perimeter gap all the way around, so the boards of the ceiling aren't quite touching the walls. We want the ceiling to be completely isolated and free. There's a couple of ways of doing that. You can use 5mm thick packers or shims around the perimeter just to keep the plasterboards off, or of course if you're just being very careful to hold them off 5mm when you lift them up to the ceiling. And in terms of the screws, we're putting 5-6 screws along each fairing channel run of the plasterboard. And one last thing, because the ceiling is over 2.4 meters, which is the size of the plasterboard, obviously one full board isn't going to cover the full ceiling, but it's only leaving us with a tiny little piece on the end because it's only just over 2.4. What we don't want is to have lots of tiny little pieces of plasterboard filling in the little gaps around the edge. So what you're better off doing is actually cutting the board further down and then using a bigger piece to make up the end of the ceiling. So although we could use a full 2.4 meter sheet, what we've actually done is cut it down so it lands right on the center of this third bar, and then we'll cut another piece then to go from the center of this bar to the end of the ceiling. Okay, so the first layer of plasterboard is all up. So the next thing to do is apply our layer of Tecsound. Now, Tecsound is a very clever material and we use it for several reasons. First of all, it adds a huge amount of mass for its relative thickness. I mean, this is Tecsound SY100, which is only 5mm thick, but it weighs 10 kilograms per meter square. So it actually adds a lot more mass and density for its thickness than the acoustic plasterboard does. The second thing is it's what we call viscoelastic, which means when it clings onto a surface, it dampens and absorbs the energy and vibration in that surface. So that's going to help to absorb more of the sound energy. Finally, it's good to have a mixture of different types of mass, different thicknesses of mass, and different densities of mass all working together, because those different materials react differently to different frequencies of sound. So we get a better performance separating the plasterboards with Tecsound than we do just adding multiple layers of the same material. So that's why we're using it. Now, it's quite easy to install because it's self-adhesive. However, because it's quite flexible and very heavy, it's difficult on a ceiling to actually just try and stick it to the ceiling, applying it above your head, because it's going to flop down almost like wallpaper. So what we do instead is we apply it to the second layer of plasterboard while it's on the ground. So what we've done is we've measured our first piece of plasterboard to the right size that we want. We've cut it, then we've flipped it over onto the brown side, and then we can measure and cut the Tecsound to fit that plasterboard. And then we just trim it with a Stanley knife, very, very easy to cut. And then it's a case of sticking this sheet of Tecsound onto the back of the plasterboard, which is basically just a case of peeling away this backing paper, which reveals the very sticky self-adhesive side. Once the plasterboard is fully covered in Tecsound, we can then put it back on the plasterboard lift and raise the whole thing, the plasterboard and the Tecsound, up together, sandwiching the Tecsound in between the two sheets of plasterboard and fix it all in place. Now, I just wanted to talk very quickly about the fixings that we're using to fix the acoustic plasterboards onto the ReductoClip fairing channels. Because we're screwing into metal, you can't just use a normal screw like a timber screw. This is what we call a self-drilling screw. Basically, the only difference is where with a normal wood screw, it finishes with a point, so it pierces into the wood. This actually has an end which resembles more like a drill bit. And what it actually does is as you're screwing it, it actually drills a hole into the fairing channel and then threads into it. So if you're screwing into metal, you want a self-drilling screw. So we've just finished applying the acoustic sealant around the 5mm perimeter gap. And we've also used it to fill in some very small gaps where the plasterboard sheets haven't butted up perfectly tightly. They're very, very close. It's only a tiny, tiny gap. But with the excess sealant, we've just filled that up just to make sure. And that's basically done now. So the only thing left is for a plasterer to come out and do a plaster skim to cover up all the screw heads and all the seams and get it nice and smooth and finished. He's also going to finish the tops of the walls as well, so it's all nice and smooth. And once the ceiling's been plastered, you then need to think about your fixtures and fittings. Now, ideally, in terms of lighting, we want lights that are going to be either pendant lights and come down from the ceiling or surface mounted. In a perfect world, we try and avoid things like spotlights and downlights, because what you're basically doing is cutting a big hole out of your soundproofing and removing all those layers of mass to just put a light in there. So that is going to reduce the performance to a degree. But if you do want to use spotlights, then you can use acoustic hoods or covers, which will minimize to a degree the negative effect. So now we're all finished. We're going to do a second test so we can compare to how it was performing before. Now, just to mention, the sealant hasn't fully cured yet, so the performance will actually get even better over the next 24 hours, but it should certainly give us a good indication. Now, as a quick reminder, we found before that the background noise, without any distinguishable sound, we were measuring around 40 decibels. When we had impact on the roof above, it was going up to about 55 to 60 decibels. So the closer we can get to 40, the closer we are to silence, basically. So there we go. So with the same level of impact, we're now measuring between 43 and 45, which means we've reduced around 10 to 12 decibels of reduction, which is a huge amount. The thing to remember with the decibel scale being logarithmic is that every 10 decibels that you reduce is actually a halving of the volume. So a 10 to 15 decibel improvement is a massive, massive amount in real world terms. So for those who are interested, the ceiling in terms of size was just over 2.5 meters one way and just under 3 meters in the other way. And cost-wise for the full system, so the ReductoClips, the fairing bars, the acoustic plasterboard, Tecsound, mineral wool, sealants, fixings, absolutely everything, VAT and delivery all included, it'd have come to around £1,100. It took us 2 days to install, but that was with lots of stopping and starting for filming as well. Because when you're filming, we're moving lights and microphones around and we've got to keep stopping and starting. If you were just installing it, it probably would have taken a day to maybe a day and a half. In terms of performance, we can already hear a massive difference, especially for the airborne sound of things like traffic noise outside. You can't hear that at all. Hopefully next time we have heavy rainfall, we'll get a good report that it's sorted that out too. While we're talking about performance, if you are in a situation where you need to reduce noise through your ceiling, whether that's in your home, whether it's a flat or apartment, even things like music studios, home cinemas, this is the perfect system. It can also be used to meet party building regulations. It's an absolutely fantastic system for both airborne and impact reduction. It's very, very slim, simple to install. It ticks all the boxes. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful and informative. If you want some more content about soundproofing, of course, go and check out our YouTube channel. It's got loads of videos about soundproofing and acoustics. Visit our website at soundproofingstore.co.uk. And of course, if you're in a situation yourself where you need to reduce noise, whether that's noisy neighbours through a wall, whether it's through the floor, whether it's through the ceiling, whether you're building a home music studio or cinema, then of course you want to speak to an expert, do it once, do it right, and give us a call at the Soundproofing store.
So last year we decided to upgrade the flat roof. By doing this, it cracked all the inside ceilings. So we decided that they'll have to be all replastered and redone. However, we'd had a trouble through the winter of listening to the rain on the roof, a bit like when the rain's on a caravan. So we decided it might be good to get some soundproofing done. I had a look online and found the soundproofing store. I gave them a ring and we found a lovely technician on the end of the line willing to give us some advice. Listening to our problems, they came up with the ReductoClip Soundproofing System. The installation guide that was given to us and the advice from the technical team made the job quite approachable, and although my husband is a tradesman, he did find it a lot easier to follow than he thought it would be. So I got a phone call from a very friendly man who was delivering the product straight to the house the day before. The good thing was all the materials were together, so I didn't have to worry about anything. It just all came, one pallet, all bound together, sat outside, didn't have to worry about it. Well, over the last weekend, it's now been plastered. But on top of that, we can't hear the rain anymore. And I have also noticed that we live fairly close to the A1, and I'm not hearing that sound anymore neither. So hopefully, not only do we have a nice new plastered ceiling after having the roofs outside done, but we have now got much more improvement on the sound quality in the house too. I'd like to finish by saying thanks ever so much to the Soundproofing store. They were a great bunch of guys and gals actually that helped us very much, and it's just nice to know that these companies are out there willing to help.